everybody. How is everybody feeling today? Fragile. Okay. A bit tired, okay, fine. So I'm hoping that in 20 minutes' time, or thereabouts, by the time we wrap up and get towards the end of what I have to say today, I'm hoping that the resounding answer to that question is going to be excited and joyful and positive. Because what we're talking about here, actually, to a believer, to a follower of Jesus, is the most natural and joyful thing in the world. Because we're talking about how we go about sharing our faith with other people. And so, in a moment, what we're going to do is talk through it. Let me just show you a little outline. And what we're going to talk through here is we're basically going to talk about what's the point in having a strategy. So why is it necessary for a church to have an outreach strategy? We're going to talk a bit about the biblical principles. We're going to talk about which parts of the Bible we're drawing this from and why it is the way that it is, and also how those challenge us personally. And then we're going to talk about what our strategy is. And the strategy is so simple that by the end of today, you will all have it memorized. I promise. It is that simple. And then we're going to talk about why is this series called Spotting the Sacred Moment? Has anybody been wondering this? We're on now number 3, aren't we, in our series? And we've been talking about spotting the sacred moment. And basically, I stole the title. So there's a really famous course that you do in healthcare called Spotting the Sick Child. And it's all about how you notice a kid that's looking unwell on the wards, right? This is my stealing of that, and we're calling it Spotting the Sacred Moment because there are moments in each of our lives on our front lines, and we're all quite familiar with that idea. But in each of us, we have our front lines, and there are moments on those front lines, and the things that we do in our day-to-day lives, there are moments that are sacred, that God gives us, that are opportunities, that are open doors for us to share something of the reason for the hope that we have. So let's move along and talk about strategy. So what is the point in having a strategy? Well, basically, to begin with, one of the reasons for having a strategy as a church is it helps us to be good stewards of the resources that we have. We've only got a finite amount of resource, and we need to make sure that we use those resources, both in terms of financial, but also, actually, most of the resource that we have is not financial. Mostly it's about time and effort and energy and volunteers. And we've got to make sure that we use those in a way that is logical and makes sense, that helps us be productive as a church and move in the direction that we want, and it also particularly that fulfills the biblical commandments that we have to share the good news with those around us. It makes us more effective at the work that we're already doing, like we mentioned. And finally, you're going to have to forgive me for this one. It creates a self-organizing system supporting disseminated leadership. I'm sorry. Let me unpack that a little bit. What I mean is that a bit like where you have a magnet. Have you done that experiment in science? You have a magnet under a piece of paper, and you can sprinkle iron filings onto the magnet. And what happens is that iron filings line themselves up in the magnetic field, and you can see the magnetic field lines, can't you? That's a self-organizing system. So the point of having a really clear strategy that everybody knows and understands is that when we come across an idea, an initiative, when you're praying and God drops one of those ideas into your mind, then what that does is it helps us to align the idea and align our energies in such a way that it organizes itself. And what we mean when we say disseminated leadership is what we mean is we want to empower everybody in the church to be our outreach team. Right at the beginning of the series, Ollie did a cracking talk, and one of the things he said right at the beginning is he said, look, let me just tell you what you'll want to hear. There's an outreach team, they've got it covered, don't worry about it. But that isn't what we're doing. That isn't our calling. And it also isn't our joy as followers of Jesus. Actually, the way that we feel most fulfilled and joyful and connected with God is when we are following his commandment in outreach and evangelism, when we are able to share a good reason for the hope that we have. So let's talk a little bit about biblical principles. Given that I've quoted this twice, you could have figured out that this is part of it. So always be prepared to give an answer to everyone for the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect. You know, some places seem to forget that last half of the sentence, don't they? We do this with gentleness and respect. This is not about force of argument. This is not about proving that you're right all along. This is not about intellectually justifying the belief structure that you have. What I want to really draw your attention to here is that word hope. Be prepared to give an answer to everyone for the reason for the hope that you have. What would it look like for us, for you, to live a life that was characterized by radical hope? Actually, if you think about that, that is the difference. Just as you sit and ponder that, I've got a provocative question for you. What is it that you would do in your life, in your following of Jesus, in your expression of your faith? What would it do in your life? What would you do differently in your life if you knew that it would be successful? If you just imagine, if you knew something that you had in mind, some initiative, some conversation that you wanted to have with somebody, whatever it was, some way in which you want to approach your work and create the kingdom around you as you did that, if you knew it would be successful, how would you do things a little differently? What would that challenge you to step out and do and try? You see, this biblical principle is not about speaking at people who are not ready to listen. This is not about interrupting people and saying, this is the gospel. It's not about persuading people through force of argument. Actually, this is about answering the most natural question in the world. Because when people see you live in such a way that you demonstrate radical hope, that you think to yourself, Lord, you've given me this vision for a thing, or you've asked me to step out and do this thing, or maybe to form a prayer group or whatever at work or whatever it is. Lord, you've dropped that in my mind. What would it now look like to live that out with radical hope? Because that begs questions. If all you do is go around the place and don't swear at people and generally are nice and honest and stuff, they'll just think you're a nice person. If you live with radical hope, that's what begs a question. Anyway, next one. When he saw the crowds, this is Jesus speaking, by the way. He's been doing some miracles. Crowds are forming. So when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. Now, I don't know about you, but there are some promises in the Bible that I find difficult to believe. I know I shouldn't. I know it's in the Bible. But sometimes this is one of those promises where, if I'm honest, I sometimes think, Lord, really? Is the harvest so plentiful and the workers so few? Is that my experience of doing evangelistic stuff at church? Is that really? Actually, it is. But not in the way that you expect. Whenever you see that, whenever you see promises in the Bible and you think, hold on, is that the way it is? What that's telling you is that your perception of the promise is wrong. Is that we need to readjust our framework, our thinking, so that we understand what the promise really is. If you look at this one, so one of the things I want to draw your attention to is that the crowds, the people, they were not following Jesus because they recognized that they were like sheep without a shepherd. If you look carefully, that's an observation Jesus makes of them. They don't understand that of themselves. They're following Jesus because he's doing exciting stuff. He's preaching amazingly. He's doing miracles. All sorts of stuff is happening, and that's why they're following him, getting excited by him. Because he's holding up hope. He's a preacher in the midst of an occupied territory. with a people who have a 1,000-years history of God speaking into their lives, into their culture, of being, they believe themselves at some point they're going to be the culture through which God will bless all of the world. And yet they're right now under the jackboot of Roman occupation. And there's this preacher going around and he's holding up radical hope. That is why the crowds are following him. And so what he says, don't go out and just start threshing. We're not ready to send the combine harvesters out at this point. Because the harvest is plentiful, but it's not necessarily apparent. Actually, it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of progress. There's a sequence of events that need to happen before a harvest becomes apparent. When we ask the Lord of the harvest to send the workers out into the field, that's not always to do the harvesting. Someone's got to do the planting. Someone's got to plough the field. Someone's got to do all the other bits of work that go into a plentiful harvest. Now that starts to fit with my experience of what it's like, isn't it, when we do evangelism and outreach. So the point that I want to draw you to is people are not often aware of the fact that they are like sheep without a shepherd, but they are. Those of us who have been following Jesus for a while, we can see that too sometimes. We see that people are living harassed lives. I can't remember who, but someone put it really beautifully. They said, people live lives of quiet desperation. It's true. It's true. A lot of people do. You meet mums and dads in the school fields or whatever, and you meet people at work or whatever, and actually they're harassed and they're helpless because they think there is no real meaning to any of this. They think that there is no basis for real ultimate hope, that we're just a rock spinning through space at hundreds of thousands of miles an hour, and ultimately our lives and our children's lives, everything that we know, everything that we've had, all of that comes to insignificance and nothing. They believe in the story of the machine, the cold, unthinking march of evolution and nothingness. But it's not a true story. There is a true story. There is a basis for radical hope. And it's actually a moral imperative to show that to them. And so, one of the ways that is often not emphasized enough, I think, in outreach, one of the ways in which the Lord commands us to show that hope is this. A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. How many times does he say love one another? 1, 2, 3, 4 times? I think he's trying to emphasize it. Love one another. That is the thing. That is one of the ways. You know that question I was asking at the beginning, what would you do differently if you were certain of its success? One of the things that you can be certain of the success of, one of the things that I think we're being challenged by Jesus here to do differently is to live in community in a radical way. To live in community of radical hope and love. To really love one another. That is magnetic. When people see that and they see us living in community, they see us sharing with each other, that is a magnetic thing and it's exciting. Okay, so those are the principles from which we're drawing the strategy. So let's go through what the strategy actually is, and you're going to memorize it in less than 5 minutes. Here we go. So the first thought, and this is a sequence of just 3 thoughts that organize the way in which we as a church are planning to organize our outreach and the way in which we want to help to present the good news to the people around us. So the first thing is we want to help people to have this thought. I think I'll try church. Okay? Simple as that. We want to help people do that. So we're going to hold up examples of radical hope. We're going to live in such a way that we love one another, that we obviously, visibly live in community of love and of compassion with each other, where we meet each other's needs. Because when people see that, that's an example of radical hope. And when you go and live out in the world, when you do your things, there's a lot to talk about when community is happening. It's exciting. I think I I was at work one time and I had some kind of child crisis-y thing. I got a phone call from the school, and they were saying, your kid's unwell, we need you to pick him up from school, so on. But I was on call, so I couldn't just leave work. And my wife was on call for pediatrics, so she couldn't leave work either. So we had a bit of a dilemma. So what do? Well, we phone our church community. We get in touch with the people who we love, who we know, who are around in the community, and within 20 minutes, we had another member of the church community offer to come pick our kids up from school. They're going to look after them, feed them, see that they're all right. And someone next to me at the time that this happened, and this was just run-of-the-mill for me. This is just how we live in church, isn't it? So someone next to me said, that's extraordinary that you can do that, and that there's people in your community who will just step up and look after things for you. I don't have anyone like that. I live far from my family. I don't really have very trusting relationships with my neighbours, certainly not to the extent that I would trust them with my kids. It's extraordinary to me that you have a community. And I was like, there's 30, 40 people here that, about half of them have looked after my kids already at some point. And this blew their mind. Because that's radical. That's unusual. And you see, when we live in community where hope is visible, where love is that visible, actually that gives us a lot of material to talk about when we're sharing our faith, and we're sharing a reason for the hope that we have. So, in that moment there was an opportunity for that co-worker to think to themselves, and I think they had this thought, maybe I should try church. I don't know if they did. I don't really know what the outcome of that story is. Maybe they're still thinking that occasionally. But that's the idea. We just want to help people have that thought. So once they've tried church, this is the next thought. Let's say they've come to church once or twice, and they think, I think I'm going to stick around here for a little while. And so we're going to create, and we're going to organize ourselves in church in such a way that that's a natural progression. That people think either that's by meeting the need that brought them to church in the first place, and often we can make the ways that we look after people really visible. We can make it clear. Let's say someone comes to church partly because they see the benefit of that community. They think to themselves, wouldn't it be lovely to live in a loving community like this? And so they get immediate connection to that loving community. They immediately have the offer of joining a life group, or they immediately have the offer of going to a parents group, or having a social with some of the nice people that they've met at church, and they think to themselves, oh goodness, I can make a community, I can build relationships in my community that quickly and that easily. That's great. And I'm going to stick around here for a while. Notice that none of this is subterfuge. None of this is trying to get people in the door and convince them of something that isn't really true. It's not. We're just making it really easy for people to access what's good about being a part of church. It's nothing. It's all just exactly what it says on the tin. So we're going to help people to do that. And then the last thought is, maybe this Jesus stuff is actually true. Because actually often people don't think that to begin with. People don't think to themselves, all right, actually, it does happen occasionally, honestly. Sometimes people have a dream in the night, they meet Jesus, and they come to church, and they're just ready to go. Sometimes that happens, okay? But doesn't often. Actually, most people's experience of coming to faith, particularly as adults, is that they start, and it's a gradual progression, and it takes some time of exposure to the truth for them to start to think, hold on, I don't actually have to abandon my intellectual integrity to believe any of this. This isn't just nonsense. Because a lot of people start by thinking, well, we're just nuts, that we just believe a whole bunch of stuff that can't possibly be true. But actually, what we're going to do is, through our preaching, through the opportunities that we have to go deeper with people, through mentoring opportunities, through all sorts of things, through life groups, we're going to create the environment where we reassure people that this is actually true. We're not just pretending. We're not just conjuring up faith through emotional manipulation. We're not doing any of those funny this just actually makes sense. A good friend of my parents wrote a book, and I'd recommend it to you, actually. It's a really succinct, good explanation of apologetic basis for faith. Apologetic just means being ready for an answer. It's a rational answer. And it's a book that just says, "It Makes Sense," by a chap called Steve Gaukroger. It's worth looking up. It's really, really good. So maybe this Jesus stuff is actually true, and we're going to create opportunities for people to notice that. So then, let's talk about those sacred moments that we have. So, thank you. So the first thing to do is, I want for everybody to think of evangelism as an extension of their own personal walk with Jesus. Because that's what it really is. All it is. To be honest with you, the more I love Jesus, the more I can't help talk about him. The more I feel blessed in my walk with Jesus and in my study of the scripture, there are some days where I arrive at work and I've had a quiet time before I've got. I don't want to give the wrong impression. This does not happen every day. But there are some days where I've had a quiet time before I've gone in, and I arrive at work and I'm just like floating, 3 inches above the ground or so. I'm just like so beaming from the moment that I've had with Jesus, from something that he said to me about something, from some, that people, they say, "You're looking chipper, what's got into you?" And just once or twice, I'm not going to pretend, I don't always have the courage to do this, but just once or twice, I've said something like, well, basically, before I came in, I just had this wonderful prayer time with God, and I'm just buzzing from that. And that's like mind-blowing to some people, like, what? So pray first. Walk closely with Jesus. Ask him to show you where the opportunities are. We are not interested in creating a church that is led by program-based evangelism. That is just about kind of the machinations of a program that would carry on if God ceased to exist tomorrow. We don't want to do that. What we want to do, what we're interested in, is following Jesus' example. We want to be spirit-filled in the work that we do. So pray first. It's better to do nothing at all than act without the Lord of the harvest. That's the principle Jesus said, isn't it? Look, the harvest is plentiful, the workers are few. Not grab your pitchforks and go. It was pray that the Lord of the harvest would send the workers. Pray first. Next one. Prepare. They all begin with P because I've been doing preaching training. So prepare, pray, prepare, provide it'll be. So prepare. Having prayed, specifically pray about people that you know and their needs. Be ready. I always think sometimes, I remind myself every now and again, the degree of faith that I have in this prayer can be measured by the degree of preparedness that I have that God is actually going to answer it. It's a thought, isn't it? So who's ready for this? That idea you had at the beginning when I challenged you to think what you might do differently if you were certain of its success? Start praying about that. Don't do anything. Just start praying about it. Start thinking about it. And if God is nudging you, prepare. Get ready. If it means doing education, do it. Learn something. Do something new. Develop yourself. Nothing wrong with that. Prepare. By the way, I think that every Christian should, to some extent, study apologetics. That's not exactly biblical. That's just my personal opinion. But actually, I think that all of us should be ready to give an answer. We should be ready to give a rational basis for our belief, not just restating hope. They've seen the hope already. Personal stories are great, but sometimes a rational basis for faith, that really helps. So be prepared. If you're praying that you might have conversations with people at work, start thinking about those conversations. Have faith that God is at some point going to answer those prayers, that those people might start asking you questions. Be ready with your answers. That's not me to emphasize knowing the answers and knowing it all. It's just about being able to give a humble, gentle, respectful, accurate answer. Because there's nothing that talks louder than common sense, is there? You can have all the eloquent speech, and you can have all the, whatever kind of you can be as gifted a speaker or a communicator as you like, but actually there's nothing talks quite so loud as common sense. And so actually just being ready to give a decent answer, that's powerful. The last one is provide. Pray, prepare, provide. Remember that our role here is to be givers and offerers of reasoned hope, to have compassion on the harassed and the helpless, to offer them the relief of finding the good shepherd. See, Jesus has hope to offer with the miracles and with the amazing speaking. We can make hope visible by living in a community that makes explicit our love for each other, by living in such a way that we have radical hope that makes people ask, why? Do you really think that's going to work? Yeah. By living with radical hope, we can show that we have hope. And then at some point, someone's going to ask, why? Why do you think this is likely to happen? Really? You think that you can actually change that about the world in which you live? Or you really think that your initiative is actually going to change the way in which people feel about, I don't know, looking after distressed kids or whatever? Well, yeah, I do. Because it's not just about me and my initiative. I've got a reason for this hope. I think that I actually happen to believe that God has asked me to do this thing. And if God has asked me to do the thing, I can't be held accountable for its success or not, but I'm going to have a go at doing the thing, and it's up to him to see what happens. And that's powerful. If you share that level of uncertainty with someone, but you say, I'm going to step out of faith anyway, they watch. That's quite powerful. Okay. So, what's going to happen next then? So, I thought it'd be helpful to have a slide here with just a couple of things, because sometimes when we stand up as a church leader and we start talking about a change in strategy or something like that, people worry. So the first thing to say is we've got no plans at all to shut down any ongoing active ministry. So we haven't got any plans about that. Don't worry about that. That's not the thought. Next week, we're going to get even more practical. We're going to think a little bit. We're going to have a sort of a... It's going to be kind of like a magazine show or a podcast thing, isn't it? We're going to have a few people up here to interview. We're going to start helping you think about the answer to that question. What would I do differently if I was certain of its success? What does it look like in my life to start living with radical hope? So we're going to get a bit more practical about that, and we'll start thinking about practical things that we can do. And remember, it's not about heroic efforts. No one's becoming Billy Graham here. Sorry? Well, I don't know. Maybe some people are. I don't know. Maybe you've got a point. But it's not about radical efforts. My gut reaction whenever I go to a sermon or a seminar or something like that about outreach and evangelism, and I share this as the guy who wrote the evangelism strategy, right? So my gut reaction is to think, I'm not an evangelist. I don't know how to talk to people about Jesus. I know how ridiculous that looks right now. But that's my gut reaction, and that is actually how most people feel about outreach, and that's normal and that's okay. We're not asking you to do anything weird. It's not about the heroic efforts. It's actually, the harvest is plentiful. It is. All we need to do is to ask the Lord each morning, or whenever it is that you do your praying, whatever works for you, each time, all we need to do is to ask the Lord, show me where I can live with radical hope. Show me where I can make people beg the question, what is the reason for the hope that you have? Because there is a reason. There is a real reason, and it's not the story of the machine that most people are stuck with. That hopeless, desperate life of quiet desperation. That's, people don't have to live like that. And we can provide them with an example of hope, but also we can provide them with good, reasoned, logical reasons for that hope as well. I'll close with just two thoughts. One is that I'm going to repeat this from my wife, so I'm just shamelessly stealing her sentences. But she mentioned to me the other week, when we were talking about our neighbours and the people around us and how we can share God with them, she said, evangelism really is just making strangers neighbours, and it's making neighbours family. That's all outreach is. It's just making strangers neighbours and neighbours family. It's about helping people move in closer to that community of love. It's all about that, isn't it? Love one another. By one another, he means us as a church. He means our relationships within ourselves as a church. But he also means love those around us. Make strangers neighbours and neighbours family. I'm just going to pray. Father God, I just ask that for myself and for everybody here. Lord, I ask that you would infuse us today, not with a burden of responsibility, but with a spirit of joy and delight. Because at the end of the day, talking about you, talking about our hope, making people closer, making strangers into neighbours and neighbours' family, Lord, that at the end of the day is the most natural thing in the world. Lord, I just pray that you would give each of us the confidence and the joy and the courage to go out and to build relationships and to show love and to show radical hope. In your name, amen.